Britain's first black woman MP and the mother of the House, Diane Abbott, has finally been readmitted to the Labour Party. That's after her suspension was lifted by Prime Minister Andy Burnham's new chief whip, Annalisa Midgley, following the completion of an internal process. So what was Abbott alleged to have done? The suspension relates to a letter Abbott published in The Observer back in 2023, in which she claimed that Irish people, Jewish people and travellers suffered from prejudice, which, while similar to racism, is not in fact racism, which she appeared to define as relating only to skin colour. Those groups, she said, quote, are not all their lives subject to racism. That letter got her into hot water, and though Abbott apologised at the time, then leader of the party, Keir Starmer, withdrew the whip. The whip was then restored in May 2024, and just a month before the July general election, Abbott was confirmed as the party's candidate for her seat in Hackney North, although it was very clear to outsiders that the Parliamentary Labour Party were doing everything in their power to stop her from being that candidate. But in July last year, Abbott appeared on Radio 4, where, according to some, she reiterated the points she'd made in the letter. And we'll come to that radio interview in just a moment. She also posted around the same time and very quickly deleted, a tweet in which she called the IDF the Jewish Defence Forces. Later that month, she was suspended from the Labour Party again, with a senior party official telling the paper it was unlikely she'd ever be readmitted to the party. Well, how wrong they were. In a statement posted online on Thursday, Abbott said this. Today, following a process conducted in line with party rules and approved by the independent review process, I have been readmitted to the Labour Party. I've been issued with a formal warning for a tweet I previously posted. By inadvertently referring to the Israeli Defence Force as the Jewish Defence Force, I used wording that conflates the actions of the State of Israel with the Jewish community. I am deeply sorry for any hurt caused by that conflation and apologise for any hurt caused by it. I have been and remain a lifelong anti-racist and remain deeply committed to opposing racism in all of its forms. Now, you'd think that would be that, except on Thursday night, Newsnight dedicated more than half the programme to Abbott's readmission to the party. And it began with the show's political editor, Nicholas Watt, revealing he had a pretty one-sided Labour Party contact book.
I am hearing unease amongst Labour MPs who are supportive of the Jewish community. One of them I spoke to and they said, oh my God, for God's sake, they said to me, they talked about real disappointment. I spoke to another Labour MP. They said to me, this is absolutely outrageous. They fear that this could be a step backwards. And they were particularly uneasy that this has happened during the recess when there's no ability for Labour MPs to walk up to their whip immediately and say, what is going on there? Amongst members of the Jewish Labour movement, they are supportive and have confidence in Andy Burnham, but one said to me they were worried that this could provide a pretext for those on the left, those who still have admiration for Jeremy Corbyn, that they could say, in the words of this person, let's overcome the injustice that was done to people who were removed from the Labour Party over allegations of anti-Semitism. Worried about that. I was speaking to Dame Louise Ellman, of course a formerly prominent Labour MP who left the Labour Party over the anti-Semitism allegations and then came back at the invitation of Keir Starmer. She was slightly concerned by the wording of Diane Abbott's statement today. So the adverse finding against Diane Abbott, which led her to apologise, was a tweet a year ago in which she described the Israeli Defence Forces as the Jewish Defence Forces. She apologised for that because there was an adverse finding on that. And then this is what Diane Abbott said. I am deeply sorry for any hurt caused by that conflation and apologise for any hurt caused by it. And it was the use of the word any that Louise Ellman picked up on. And Louise Ellman, this is what she said to me. There have been a succession of unfortunate errors in relation to Diane's perception of Jewish people. I'm not sure whether she understands the mistake she's made or whether she has found a form of words to allow the whip to be restored.
So I guess the implication of that is that the use of the any suggests somehow that Abbott doesn't really mean it and has just found a kind of formalistic form of words which allows it to be restored. I mean, I'm not really sure how you can, infer that from the apology. It's just the use of the word any hurt. I would also say any hurt if I was apologising to somebody. I didn't really understand that inference there. But what we do know is that Abbott wasn't required to apologise over the remarks she made on Radio 4 about racism. So that was followed when she had the whip restored after the original suspension over the Observer article. She then, a little while later, went on the radio and made some remarks that we're going to come to. And those remarks haven't been she doesn't seem to have had to apologise for those. That doesn't seem to have been a finding about those remarks on the radio programme. This was now Phil Rosenberg, president of the board of Jewish deputies, giving his take.
Well, I'm very sad and very concerned. I'm sad because in many ways Diane Abbott is an icon, you know, the longest serving female MP, the first black female MP.
Mother of the House.
Mother of the House. And so you'd hope that we would find common cause in fighting racism in all its different guises. But over and over again, she's making these statements that are offensive to the Jewish community at a time when there is heightened anti-Semitism, deadly anti-Semitism, as we saw at Heaton Park. And just completely false statements. You know, when the Nazis developed their racial prejudice laws, they were basing them on discrimination against African-American people under the Jim Crow laws. There is Jews and black people should be fighting racism together. And unfortunately, Diane Abbott over and over again makes these comments and then doubles down on them. And just once again, she's apologised for the thing.
Well, she didn't double down this time. She actually apologised for the tweet.
She apologised, but not for the original thing that she had doubled down for.
Right.
And I'm just really sad. And I'm concerned because, as you were implying, we've seen this movie before. And it doesn't end well for the Jewish community, and it doesn't end well for Labour.
So that was a reference to Abbott apparently doubling down on her comments about her original comments in the Observer about racism in that later Radio 4 interview. That also became the subject of a heated exchange between Newsnight's presenter Adam Fleming and Labour MP Bel Ribeiro Addy.
Something that was said earlier that was wrong, talking about the interview that she did, saying that Diane said in the interview that she had done nothing wrong. I think this is where some of the issues arise, where sometimes, you know, the wrong sense is taken out of what Diane had said. She didn't say that. And she actually reiterated she said she stood by her apology that she made regarding the Observer letter in that same interview. So it's very strange that it was reported in that way and that you've reported it that way today.
Well, no, just so people are clear, if you go back and listen to the Jim Naughty programme, which was broadcast on Radio 4 last year, he says to Diane Abbott, do you regret what you said in that letter? And she said no. And that is what led to her being suspended this latest time.
The thing is, I think you actually have to listen to the whole interview because I think the way in which it was clipped following her saying no, she was referring to what he had asked her before, whether or not she was clear on the fact that people experience racism differently. She also said that she stands by the apology that she gave after having written the letter. So I think you have to listen to it in its full context. And regardless of trying to pick at these particular things, Diane has been very clear about where she's offending somebody, offending a group of people, being apologetic of it and understanding what has gone wrong. And everybody knows that Diane is someone who has challenged all forms of racism.
That exchange continued.
But Belle, we're not picking at these things, in your words. We're reflecting genuine concern.
That particular interview. I'm saying if you wanted to refer to anything else that has been said, which I must note she's gone and apologised for. I would like to say if you listen to the interview properly, as many people have, what people inferred from it and what was reported from it was not entirely accurate. That is all I'm saying. And Diane has been very, very clear about her apology, her initial apology, and the apology that she's reiterated today. She's very pleased to be back in the Labour Party. And I think you'll find that many people are pleased that she is also. 35,000 people signed a petition saying that she should be reinstated. And I think that's an important thing to note.
Belle, just before you interrupted me, which is the wrong way around for these things to work, I think, in TV news, I was going to say, we're not just picking at things she said in interviews and fixating on them. Nick has been reflecting back genuine concern from your colleagues in Labour.
Okay,
about how this has been handled.
I'm making a point about specifically.
So answer the point I'm making now.
I'm making a point specifically about what you have said in terms of picking at
and you
things.
made that point, and I'm asking you to make a different point about your colleagues tonight and how they're feeling about this.
No, I have no issue with my colleagues having concerns, and I think it's right for them to express it. I was talking about your point. Let's be very, very clear that I was talking about what you had said in regards to the interview.
Let's not get hung up on that.
Yes. No, but it's important to make to make a proper statement when you're reflecting back on something that someone has said. To now try and say that I have said that an entire community's issue should, or members of my colleagues should be, issues shouldn't be of any concern. That is also not something.
No, I'm giving you a chance.
So I actually don't agree with Rabira Addy's take on the interview, which we're going to listen to in a minute. But I do think she was like super sharp to catch that slide that was being made between her sort of arguing about the meaning of the interview and the interviewer sort of then making it sound as though perhaps she was also dismissing concerns of MPs and the Jewish community. I think that was a very sharp catch there. But look, let's have a listen to the 2025 interview and see if Abbott really did double down on the Observer letter.
You got into terrible trouble for a letter you wrote to the Observer about racism. And you appeared to suggest, in the view of some of your critics anyway, that the kind of anti-Semitism that the Jewish community suffered, or travellers suffered, or Irish people suffered, was somehow different from the racism that you as a young black person had suffered. You were suspended and there was a great hoo-ha. Do you look back on that with regret?
No, not at all. Clearly, there must be a difference between racism, which is about colour, and other types of racism, because you can see a traveller or a Jewish person walking down the street. You don't know. You don't know unless you stop to speak to them or you're in a meeting with them. But if you see a black person walking down the street, you see straight away that they're black. They are different types of racism.
But the effect is the same. If you are going to a synagogue on a Saturday morning and you have to have guards outside because some people might come along and want to insult you or even throw things at you, that's pretty much the same as the kind of thing you describe in your book as happening to you as a black person. The fact is, one is a person of colour and one isn't, is neither here nor there. If you suffer it, it's still damaging,
It is here because you can spot that person of colour from hundreds of yards away. That is what is different.
You withdrew the thing. You said, look, if this is misunderstood, as you thought it was, then I apologise for it. But fundamentally, you don't believe you did anything wrong, or you didn't attempt to say something that you didn't believe.
I just think that it's silly to try and claim that racism, which is about skin colour, is the same as other types of racism. I don't know why people would say that.
But you would, I assume, condemn anti-Semitic behaviour in the same way that you would condemn racist behaviour against someone simply because of the colour of their skin.
Well, of course. And I do get a bit weary of people trying to pin the anti-Semitic label on me, because I've spent a lifetime fighting racism of all kinds, and in particular fighting anti-Semitism, partly because of the nature of my constituency.
So I think it's fairly subtle. It was not actually even subtle at all, actually. She said one thing in the Observer article, which was that racism was one thing and prejudice was a different thing, and they were easily mistaken for one another. But, you know, Jewish people, travellers, the Irish don't experience racism, they only experience prejudice. And she also compared it to like the experience, you know, she'd used redheads as an example of experiencing prejudice. That was a mistake. Here in this interview, she's not actually saying any of that. She's just saying that actually there are differences in the way that racism is enacted and experienced, and that some racism, you know, is a result of directly the way that somebody looks. And on LBC, caller Barry rang into the studio to give pretty much that take on the Abbott case.
People didn't hear the words she said, partly because she's a black woman. So they dismissed her. So they refused to hear the fact that she said that other people face prejudice. They do face prejudice. It doesn't mean that it's worse or better. It just means that it is. I'm a black man, and when I walk down the street, it doesn't matter that I'm almost 50 years old, people will still cross the road. They will still cross the road, they will still grab their handbags. I ask the question, are they being careful or are they being prejudiced? I've heard MPs say that they don't like black and brown faces on TV. Too many on adverts. There was some outrage, but you know what? There wasn't the same clamour. They don't go on about it. They've lived. She's okay now. She's still an MP. My racism is literally on my skin.
Yeah.
Yours, yes, yes, people are treated differently for other reasons, but mine is superficial.
Paul, I'm not surprised that Abbott they didn't find anything wrong with what she said on the radio, because I think what she said on the radio was completely true, and it was different from the clumsily phrased thing and potentially false thing that she said in the Observer. I think that, it seems, as she said, fairly obvious that there are different types of racisms which are just responses to different features of people. All of them are racism, but they're experienced differently and they are triggered differently.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to have her back in the party, in the Labour Party. What do you think about this?
This whole thing is it pissed me off so much, to be honest, excuse my language, like watching all this again happening. It's like the most bad faith interpretation of what Diane Abbott was trying to say and has been trying to say for a very long time, which is an incredibly simple, straightforward, really uncontroversial point, pretty much anywhere in the world outside of like the hermetically sealed nonsense of the Labour Party, where like these issues become just distorted beyond any sort of reasonable interpretation, and it's filtering into a political process. It's basically so toxified, this discourse, you can't have a serious conversation. So I think the first things first we have to do is like straighten out what happened. She sent the letter to the Observer where she was trying to make the point that there are differences in the ways the prejudice express depending on the axis on which the prejudice happens. So if you're a black person, it's on your skin, people will respond to you. If you're Jewish, you might not be visibly Jewish. You might not be noticed unless you're wearing a kippah. So you might be able to, you won't experience racism in the same way. That's totally uncontroversial thing to say, that different types of prejudice express themselves differently. Just in the same way that anti-black racism, the types of stereotypes that will be associated with blackness is different to the types of stereotypes that will be associated with people who are Jewish and who are Muslim, because they're all culturally determined by different historical processes. Black people, growing up in South Africa and apartheid, like the racism towards black people is that they're thick, that they are smelly, that they are they're animalistic. The type of prejudice that's shown towards Jewish people is that they are too smart for their own good, that they are malevolent operators because they're loan sharks, they're Shylocks, and Muslims, now the culturally created prejudice around them is that that Islam is a fundamentally violent religion. These people who deep down, regardless of what country they live in, actually have a Muslim gene that makes them want to do Sharia law everywhere. Like, obviously different types of prejudice expressed differently because all prejudice is socially constructed, and it's socially constructed at different times by different people for different reasons, usually economic domination. That's the key thing, right? So Diane Abbott's first edit to the Observer is plainly clumsily written.
Yeah.
She clearly says something that underplays the extent and consequence of anti-Jewish prejudice. Obviously.
The redheads thing was crazy.
Yeah, obviously. And she immediately apologizes for it, right? And she says, I'm really sorry. This was a drafting error. I sent through a draft of this letter that was wrong. I was dealing with my staff member. I meant to send through a later draft where he corrected it, and the wrong one got in. Of course, the question becomes like, why did the Observer run this letter they knew didn't reflect her views? That's a different discussion. But she immediately apologized, right? And in that moment, the key issue was, well, how do you deal with an apology from Diane Abbott versus somebody like Steve Reed? Because Steve Reed made incredibly clumsy comments about Jewish businessmen, and he was immediately absolved. He was like, it's fine. You made a mistake. We are going to, part of what drives so much British politics is basically who gets the benefit of the doubt in a situation like this. Steve Reed immediately got the benefit of the doubt. Diane Abbott didn't. And Diane Abbott didn't get the benefit of the doubt for all sorts of reasons, not least racism, but also not least because the people who didn't want to give the benefit of the doubt were the same people who make the decision about whether she's suspended or not, right? Now, that happens. They take a year to investigate a letter, which she's apologized for, which is an absurdity, and is plainly designed to humiliate her. There's simply no reason for it to take a year to investigate her. And they clear her, and they lie about her repeatedly in that year. Keir Starmer gives an interview where he says, one of the first things I did when I came in as leader is I didn't get involved in this. She's still going, this is an independent process. I have no role in this. By the time that he gave that interview, she'd already been cleared by the party of wrongdoing. She'd gone through a process. All that happened was for the whip to be restored. They repeatedly lied about it. Then we had the Frank Hester situation where she's racially, there's a horrible thing that Frank Hester says. There's a discussion in Parliament where she's the only person not called to give a discussion about it. Really treated her abominably, right?
And then he makes a big show of sort of going over, right?
Yeah. And she says, and there's a conversation, he says, like, anything I can do. She's like, give me the goddamn whip back. And basically she has to fight tooth and nail and mobilize like a large left-wing constituency, predominantly black in her constituency, to make sure she can actually just stand as the MP, and she wins that battle. Then she gives this interview to the BBC where plainly what she's saying is, I stand by the original point that I was making, which is entirely uncontroversial.
It's so obvious that's what she's saying, yeah.
It's so obvious what she's saying is like, she's not saying, oh, I actually meant the originally worded observer letter. She's saying, the point that I'm trying to make is that different types of racism and prejudice express themselves, which is why I find Phil Rosenberg's comments so disgusting. Really pisses me off. This idea that she's not actually standing in solidarity with Jewish people by saying, actually, we should be sensitive to the unique ways in which anti-Semitism, anti-black racism are exposed, is fundamentally showing you're sensitive to the issue of anti-Semitism. Yeah. Like, it pisses me off that he's even using that moment to imply, as far as I can understand, that he's saying that she's actually drawing some sort of negative distinction between the black and the Jewish community, and she's trying to draw a wedge. She's not. She's saying these are different experiences, and we can have a conversation about that, right? The other thing that drives me mad, and I've got a lot of things to get off my chest here, you can tell. I'm on a roll. The thing that pisses me off about Newsnight so much, and I put this on Twitter today, and I've been trying to take a bit of a Twitter holiday for the last couple of days. But before the book came out, the first big story that I wanted to release was about Paul Ovenden. Now, Paul Ovenden was, at the time the book came out, the chief of the head of strategy at Number 10. He'd been in the Labour Comms department for a long time. And I had these messages from 2014, 2015, where he's saying utterly despicable things about Diane Abbott. He's telling another female staffer, white female staffer in this conversation, recounting basically getting drunk with other staffers the night before, then having a game of sex, marry, kill about Diane Abbott, and then making sexualized comments about it, really quite disgusting stuff. This stuff is plainly in the public interest, right? And we know it's in the public interest because when I took it to a proper news outlet, they actually published it, and immediately he resigned, right? And the reason it's in the public interest is because you can't have somebody who's the head of strategy saying these things about black people and about Diane Abbott, right? Now, the first people I took that story to was Newsnight. I took the story to them, I think it was in August last year. And for 6 weeks, Newsnight told me they were interested. They didn't run the story. And every conversation I had, and I'm not going to name the person I spoke to, was like, oh, very nicey, and we think it's such an important story, but we're having editorial discussions. And by the end of it, I basically got the message. It was like, you're just not going to touch this. Then I went to ITV, they ran it in 3 days, right? So Newsnight has a consistent pattern of misrepresenting and misreporting on Diane Abbott and not giving the alternative version, right? So even in that platform, even in that panel right there, 5-6 white people talking about racism. Why on earth isn't Martin Ford on that panel? Martin Ford has repeatedly been asked to give, discussions about Diane Abbott. He's worked at Diane Abbott. He's helped to try and navigate some of her disciplinary issues. Why isn't he being brought on board to discuss this issue? Instead, we have this entirely tone-deaf discussion, which misrepresents what Diane Abbott says. The other thing, really the reason she was resuspended is because of the BBC. Because what actually happened at that moment is, if you listen to that interview, it's plain what she's saying. The BBC clipped that interview in socials to make it sound like she was saying she didn't regret sending that letter, which wasn't true. And immediately as that happened, she was suspended again. There was a direct line between them posting a misleading thing on socials and Diane Abbott being suspended. So we have a situation where they are repeatedly misrepresenting what she says. They're getting people on board who are also, I think, giving the worst faith interpretation of what she has to say. They are giving no countervailing opinions. There's not a single person on that panel who's not white to speak about it. And this is also in the context in which they have been given hard evidence of a serious misconduct by a senior Labour official in government about Diane Abbott, and they haven't run that story. Like, I don't think at this point I'm looking at this, I'm thinking this is not an isolated incident. This is a cultural problem within Newsnight, that they are, for some reason, unable to report accurately and sensitively on this issue. And if they were able to report accurately and sensitively on this issue, it wouldn't be in half an hour, half of the episode. It'd be a 2-minute discussion. And part of that discussion would be, this person has said 2 things in their life, 2 things in a life that's 80 years long, that you don't like on social media. And you think that counts more than 80 years of anti-racist practice. I mean, it's outrageous sort of stuff. It's outrageous stuff. And the BBC really should be ashamed of their conduct. Should be ashamed of their conduct back in 2024, she suspended. They should be ashamed of what they did there.